Gas prices in America have always been a sensitive subject. When they rise, the entire country feels the pressure, from ordinary commuters filling up their tanks, to truckers hauling goods across state lines, to families planning summer road trips. But now, experts are warning that the United States could soon be facing something far worse than a minor increase. Analysts are pointing to the possibility of gas prices reaching $7 per gallon, a level that would shock the entire economy and shake millions of households to their core. This isn't just speculation. Multiple factors are colliding at the same time, creating a perfect storm. Global oil supply chains are under strain. Production cuts from OPEC are tightening the market, and geopolitical tensions are raising fears of disruption. At the same time, U.S. refineries are struggling to keep up with demand, with aging infrastructure and reduced capacity after years of underinvestment. For the average American driver, the math is devastating. At $7 a gallon, the cost of filling up a modest sedan could jump to more than $100 per tank. For truckers and delivery companies, the costs would skyrocket, making goods more expensive across the board. Inflation, which Americans are already struggling with, would surge to new levels, hitting groceries, housing, and everyday necessities. And it's not just about money, it's about mobility and freedom. Millions of families would have to rethink simple routines, like driving kids to school or commuting to work. Vacations and road trips would become luxuries. For those living in rural areas with no public transportation, $7 gas could mean being effectively stranded. The warning signs are flashing red, but many Americans are still unaware of just how close this crisis might be. If current trends continue, the shock at the pump could arrive sooner than anyone expects. To understand why gas prices in America could soar to $7 per gallon, we need to look at the forces driving this crisis. It's not just one problem, it's several powerful factors all converging at once. First, global supply cuts. OPEC and its allies, especially Saudi Arabia and Russia, have been deliberately restricting oil output to keep prices elevated. These cuts remove millions of barrels per day from the global market, forcing import-dependent countries like the United States to pay higher prices. Second, U.S. refining bottlenecks. Even though America produces plenty of crude oil, turning that crude into gasoline is the real challenge. Over the past decade, several U.S. refineries have closed or scaled back operations due to high costs, environmental regulations, and declining profits. Today, America has significantly less refining capacity than it did 20 years ago. This means that even if crude oil is available, there's not enough capacity to turn it into fuel quickly, pushing pump prices higher. Third, geopolitical instability. Conflicts in the Middle East, tensions with Russia, and uncertainty around global shipping routes are adding volatility. Every time there's a threat to pipelines, shipping lanes, or oil fields, markets panic and prices spike. Fourth, seasonal demand surges. Gas prices traditionally rise in the summer when millions of Americans hit the road. Combine that with limited refining capacity, and the result could be an explosive jump in prices just as families need fuel the most. Finally, inflation and the weakening dollar make the situation worse. Oil is traded globally in US dollars, so when the dollar weakens, it takes more money to buy the same barrel of oil. That cost gets passed directly to American drivers. When you add all of these pressures together, the idea of $7 gas doesn't sound far-fetched. It sounds inevitable. And the scary part is, once prices start spiking, they often rise faster than expected, leaving families and businesses with little time to prepare. If gas prices really hit $7 per gallon, the impact on ordinary Americans and the entire U.S. economy would be devastating. Household budgets would collapse. The average American family already spends thousands of dollars per year on gasoline. At $7 a gallon, commuting to work, driving kids to school, or even running daily errands would suddenly become unaffordable for millions. Lower-income households, which already spend a higher percentage of their income on fuel, would be hit hardest. Truckers and logistics would suffer next. Almost everything in America, from groceries to electronics, is transported by truck. Diesel fuel is closely tied to gasoline prices, and if those costs surge, shipping companies will pass the burden directly to consumers. That means groceries, clothing, and basic goods could skyrocket in price, fueling a second wave of inflation. Small businesses would be crushed. Restaurants, delivery services, construction companies, any business that relies on transportation would see their operating costs explode. Many would have to cut jobs, raise prices, or shut down altogether. This ripple effect would push unemployment higher and weaken local economies across the country. Travel and tourism would collapse. Airfare would surge since jet fuel follows the same pricing trends. Road trips would become a luxury few could afford. Hotels, theme parks, and vacation towns would see fewer visitors, cutting deep into America's $1 trillion travel industry. The housing market could even feel the pain. Higher fuel costs make suburban and rural living more expensive, since longer commutes eat into family budgets. Buyers may abandon those areas, crashing demand and reshaping housing markets in unexpected ways. Ultimately, $7 gas would act like a national tax hike, draining disposable income, driving up the cost of goods and slowing economic growth. For a country already struggling with inflation and record debt, it could be the final straw that tips America into a severe recession. If gas prices truly surge toward $7 per gallon, the political fallout would be immediate and explosive. The White House would face massive pressure. No matter who is in office, high fuel costs instantly become a political nightmare. Presidents are often blamed directly for gas prices, even though global supply chains and oil markets are the main drivers. Still, angry voters would demand action, and the administration would be forced into desperate measures, from tapping the strategic petroleum reserve to negotiating with foreign oil producers. Congress would erupt in finger-pointing. One side would argue that the crisis proves America needs more drilling, pipelines, and energy independence. The other would double down on the push for renewables, insisting that reliance on oil is what caused the crisis in the first place. This partisan clash would make real solutions harder to reach, while the public suffers in the meantime. Truckers and labor unions could revolt. In past fuel crises, we've seen trucker convoys and nationwide protests. With diesel soaring alongside gasoline, America's trucking workforce, the backbone of the supply chain, could stage strikes, block highways, or demand government subsidies. Such disruptions would cripple commerce and make shortages even worse. Widespread protests are a real possibility. Gas prices are visible every day, on every street corner. Unlike hidden economic issues, this crisis would be impossible to ignore. Frustrated citizens could organize demonstrations, from major cities to small towns, demanding relief. In extreme cases, unrest could spill over into violence or clashes with law enforcement. Global allies would be watching closely. For decades, America has projected itself as an energy powerhouse. If the U.S. cannot control its own fuel crisis, confidence in American leadership could falter. Rivals like China and Russia might exploit the situation, while oil-rich nations gain leverage over U.S. foreign policy. In short, a $7 gas shock wouldn't just be an economic crisis. It would ignite political chaos and test America's social stability like few issues can. If gas prices were to climb to $7 per gallon, America would be standing at a historic crossroads. The nation would be forced to decide between short-term survival strategies and long-term structural change. Scenario 1: Government intervention. The first and most immediate step would likely be large-scale federal action. Washington could release massive amounts of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, pressure OPEC nations to increase production, or even subsidize fuel directly for consumers and truckers. While these moves might offer temporary relief, they wouldn't fix the deeper issues that caused the crisis. Scenario 2: Energy independence push. A more dramatic path would be doubling down on domestic production. That means opening new drilling sites, approving controversial pipelines, and rolling back environmental restrictions. Advocates argue this would bring prices down, but opponents warn it would lock the U.S. into decades of fossil fuel dependency. Scenario 3: Acceleration of the EV transition. On the flip side, sky-high gas prices could turbocharge the electric vehicle movement. Americans might shift toward EVs much faster than anticipated, simply because the cost of gasoline becomes unbearable. Automakers, already investing billions in electrification, would seize the moment. But there's a catch. The charging infrastructure and power grid aren't ready for a sudden nationwide transition. Scenario 4: A permanent shift in lifestyles. If gas remains expensive for years, Americans might fundamentally change how they live. Remote work could rise again, suburban sprawl might slow, and cities with strong public transportation could see new growth. In other words, a fuel shock might reshape American society as profoundly as the oil crises of the 1970s. At the core of all these possibilities lies one fact: a $7 gas world would change America forever. Whether through political upheaval, economic restructuring, or a technological revolution, the country would be forced to adapt. The only question is, will leaders rise to the challenge, or will the nation stumble into chaos before solutions are found?